Well, welcome to another installment of Art and Symbols of St. John's. Today we're going to move into some of the stained glass. We're going to start with the apostles, and specifically we're going to go take a look at the evangelists, the folks who wrote the Gospels, which are the books of the Bible about Jesus' life directly: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And today we're going to look at Matthew and Mark. And so over here we have a stained glass window of Matthew. If you notice in his hands, he's got a couple of things. He's got a quill and he's got a book, because he's an evangelist. He wrote a book about Jesus. Not much more to that. Each of the evangelists has a certain symbol associated with them, which is sort of the focus or the emphasis in their work, in their telling of the Jesus story. And for Matthew, it's usually a human figure or an angelic figure. And for Matthew, that's because this symbolizes the teachings of Jesus. Matthew goes into a lot of detail about Jesus as a teacher, about how we live together in community, about who God is. So for example, we get the Sermon on the Mount comes from the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus goes into a long sermon about all these teachings of what the kingdom of heaven is like. And so I want to share something from Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42, and this is part of the Sermon on the Mount. "You have heard that it was said," Jesus said, "an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you." So Jesus giving a new teaching about that old law of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This is the weird part. Over here you'll see an axe. There's not actually any significance to an axe related to Matthew. A lot of the apostles were martyred, and so you'll see a symbol representing how they were killed. Matthew was not killed with an axe, but rather a sword. So this is actually a mistake. It's a mistake that has appeared in a couple of other places, not just St. John's, but other artwork as well. And so it might be a misattribute to St. Thomas, who was beheaded with an axe. Or it might be a way of distinguishing between Matthew, who has the sword symbol, and St. Paul, who also has a sword symbol, and we'll talk about that on another day. Over here we have St. Mark, so the second gospel in the canonical order. And again, he has a book, and then underneath him you see his symbol, which is of a lion. And this comes out of a couple of different things, but the main one is that the beginning of Mark's gospel goes, "The beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. As it was written in the prophet Isaiah, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way. The voice of one crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight.'" And this is a symbol of John the Baptist. He is the one crying out in the wilderness, and so he was associated with the lion, and so that gets associated with St. Mark. Another reason for this symbol is the theme of St. Mark in general in that gospel is Jesus is always on the move. He's like a lion that's hunting its prey, just moving and leaping and going. Jesus is always immediately going here, healing someone here, teaching over here, exercising over there. Boom, boom, boom. Jesus is moving, like a lion sort of trampsing around. Underneath that is a little phrase in Latin, pax tibi. And literally this means peace be with you, which is very weird in some ways. You would think, oh, I've heard Jesus say that before, but not in Mark's gospel. Jesus doesn't say peace be with you in Mark's gospel. The reason that comes out of here and attributed to St. Mark is because it is associated with the Venetian flag, the flag of Venice of all places. Because according to church tradition, St. Mark went to Venice, Italy, and that was one of the places where he evangelized and started spreading the good news, and that's where he died. And when he entered the city, the story goes that there was an angel that greeted him and said, "Peace be with you," or Pax Tibi, Mark, evangelist, this is going to be your resting place. So doesn't have anything directly to do with St. Mark, but is attributed to this really something specific to Venice, Italy, of all places. And here it ends up in our stained glass in Northeast Philadelphia. So that's our installment here. Next week we will talk about St. Luke and St. John. Bye.